My name is Eleanor Remick, and for 15 years I played the part of the perfect wife to a man who never truly saw me. I was the one who made our home shine, who hosted his colleagues, who stood quietly beside him while he climbed higher in his world of political strategy. But on the morning of our 15th wedding anniversary, Stefan reminded me exactly how invisible I had become. We were supposed to leave for Dubai that afternoon. The flights were booked. The hotel suite confirmed. Every detail carefully arranged. It was the one promise he had repeated all year: no work. No excuses. Just the two of us. I should have known better than to believe him. 2 hours before we were scheduled to head for the airport, Stefan walked into the bedroom with his tie already loosened. That expression on his face, the one I had come to dread, told me before he spoke that the trip was over. He claimed there had been an emergency at the office. His secretary, Hilary Strauss, was distraught because her father had suffered a massive heart attack. She was the only one who understood the Morrison account, he said. And without him by her side, the company risked losing a contract worth millions. He tried to touch my shoulder as if sympathy could make up for the betrayal. He used the same line he always did: family comes first. But in his world, family never meant me. It meant Hillary. It meant Benton Strategies. It meant the next deal. The next client. The next rung on the ladder. I stood silent while he rehearsed his justification. And when I finally answered, my voice was calm enough to fool him. I said I understood. That was all he needed to hear. He kissed my forehead with visible relief, picked up his phone, and left for the office. I could have unpacked our bags. I could have cried or swallowed the disappointment the way I had dozens of times before. But instead, something shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't try to soothe him or make excuses for him. I picked up my keys and drove downtown. I didn't even know exactly why until I was standing in the lobby of Benton Strategies with my security badge in my hand. Maybe I wanted to see the crisis with my own eyes. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't just being paranoid. Either way, I took the elevator to the 15th floor and walked down the hallway toward his office. What I heard before I reached the door made my blood turn cold. Laughter. Not the hushed voices of two people navigating tragedy. Laughter sharp enough to echo in the empty corridor. Through the frosted glass, I saw the blurred outlines of Stefan and Hillary sitting close together on the leather couch. Her blouse was loose, her hair slightly undone, and in her hand was a wine glass. She was laughing at something he had just said. That light trill I had heard too many times at company dinners. Then her voice carried clearly through the door. She actually believed the heart attack story. "Stefan, you're terrible," he chuckled in response. A sound full of contempt. 15 years and she's never once questioned my priorities. It's almost too easy. That was the moment I realized my marriage wasn't simply broken. It was a performance staged at my expense. I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, listening as they reduced my life to a joke. And then, instead of storming inside, instead of screaming, I did something else entirely. I pulled out my phone, opened the airline app, and searched for tonight's flight to Dubai. First class. Seat 2 amperes. My finger hovered for a single second before I pressed book. The confirmation ping echoed like a verdict. While Stefan laughed at my predictability, I had already changed the story. The moment the wheels touched down at Dubai International Airport, I felt a strange rush of freedom. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't arriving anywhere as Stefan's wife. I was just Eleanor Remick. Alone. Holding my own passport. Standing in a city that didn't know my history. The terminal glittered with marble and glass, filled with travelers from every corner of the world. I pulled my suitcase through the arrivals hall and let the scale of it all wash over me. It was terrifying. Yes. But exhilarating too. There was no one telling me what I could or couldn't do. No one dismissing my plans as impractical. Every choice from here on belonged to me. At the hotel, I checked into the suite that was supposed to be for both of us. Standing on the balcony, I looked out at the Persian Gulf, the sun glinting off the water, skyscrapers rising in the distance. Stefan had insisted this would be the trip that reset our marriage. Instead, it was the place I began reclaiming myself. I ordered a strong Arabic coffee, sat in silence, and for the first time in years, let myself think about what I wanted, not what I was expected to accept. The next morning, I walked into a conference center where a seminar on international real estate development was taking place. It hadn't been in my plans, but I'd seen the flyer in the hotel lobby and felt a pull I couldn't ignore. Inside, speakers discussed sustainable projects in the Gulf, new ideas for green cities, and integrated housing models. I found myself taking notes as if I had never left my profession. My background in international law gave me an edge. I could follow the contractual and regulatory language easily. During a break, a tall man introduced himself. His name was David Ross, director of a Dubai-based investment firm that specialized in sustainable development. He asked why I was attending. I told him the truth that I used to work in international law, that I had given it up to be a corporate wife, and that I wasn't sure what came next. He studied me for a moment and said simply that knowledge like mine was rare, and that people here valued experience more than appearances. His words stayed with me long after the session ended. That night, back in the suite, my phone buzzed over and over again. Stefan's name filled the screen. 17 missed calls, then 21, then 30. When I finally looked at his messages, they were a spiral of fury and fear. He accused me of theft, claimed the credit card company had flagged suspicious charges, threatened to call the police, then begged me to answer. He insisted I was having some kind of breakdown. His desperation poured through every line. But instead of guilt, I felt clarity. I hadn't stolen anything. I had simply chosen to use what was mine as much as his. For years, I had watched him spend freely on his image, on Hillary, on his endless pursuit of power. Now he was panicking because he couldn't control the narrative. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone aside and opened the folder of notes I had taken during the seminar. For the first time in a decade, my handwriting filled pages with ideas and questions. I thought about the way David Ross had spoken to me with respect, not condescension. I thought about the possibility that my career wasn't gone, only paused. As the city lights flickered across the Gulf, I realized that my trip was no longer about escape. It was about rebuilding, brick by brick, a life I had once abandoned. Tomorrow, I would return to the conference, and I would keep showing up. Stefan could keep calling. I was done listening. I spent the next few days in Dubai, moving carefully between the hotel, the conference halls, and the quiet cafes where I could think without interruption. The distance gave me space, but it also sharpened my instincts. Stefan's frantic calls and messages had shifted tone. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was frightened. That fear told me there was more to uncover than just an affair. My years in international law had taught me to recognize when a man was hiding something larger than personal betrayal. He wasn't only terrified of losing me, he was terrified of losing everything he had built. On the fourth morning, I opened the slim black laptop I had slipped into my bag before leaving Chicago. It was an older machine Stefan had stopped using when his firm upgraded their systems. One he had left in our home office without a second thought. What he never realized was that in his rush to impress clients and manage deals, he had left traces behind. The device still carried cached logins and stored documents from Benton Strategies. I powered it up and waited for the familiar desktop to appear. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. This wasn't snooping for curiosity's sake. This was strategy. I navigated through archived emails, scrolling past routine scheduling notes, until I began to find messages between Stefan and key executives. The language was cautious, coded, but I knew enough about contracts and lobbying disclosures to see what was really happening. There were drafts of agreements tied to shell companies, invoices routed through third-party consultancies, and memos linking campaign contributions directly to government contracts. Hillary's name appeared again and again, not just as his assistant, but as the one preparing the paperwork. She wasn't just his mistress, she was his accomplice. One file in particular froze me in place. It was a spreadsheet labeled Morrison Contingency. At first glance, it looked like financial projections, but the notes revealed something darker. Payments disguised as consulting fees, offshore accounts connected to politicians, and timelines carefully aligned with contract awards. It was exactly the kind of evidence that could destroy Stefan's reputation and dismantle Benton's strategies from the inside. The realization left me both furious and strangely calm. For years he had told me I was naive, that I couldn't understand how power worked. And here he was, carelessly storing proof of corruption on a forgotten laptop. He underestimated me one final time. I copied every document onto an encrypted drive I had brought for personal use. Then I reached for my phone and dialed my sister, Claire Donnelly. Claire had been a political reporter for more than a decade, relentless in her pursuit of truth. She had always suspected that Stefan's firm operated in the gray areas of influence, but she had never been able to prove it. When she answered, I kept my voice low. I told her I was in Dubai, that I had evidence, and that I needed her to see it. At first, she was silent. Then she said the words I had been waiting for. This could be enough to bring them down. That night, I sat on the balcony overlooking the city, the flash drive resting on the table beside my coffee. The path ahead was suddenly clear. Revenge wasn't going to be loud or reckless. It was going to be methodical, built on proof, and carried out in stages. Stefan had always framed our marriage as a strategic partnership. Now it was my turn to treat it like a negotiation, one where I controlled the leverage. The affair had humiliated me, but the corruption would destroy him. For the first time in years, I felt like the one holding the pen to write the terms, and I intended to write them in ink Stefan could never erase. When I sent the encrypted files to Claire, I knew she would handle them with precision. She had built her career exposing corruption, and she had the instincts of someone who had spent years fighting through layers of denial and spin. Within days, she confirmed what I already suspected. The documents weren't just suspicious, they were explosive. Direct links between Benton's strategies, hidden contributions, and political contracts. It was the kind of story that reshaped careers and ended partnerships. Claire's editors didn't hesitate. They gave her the green light to publish. The article appeared on a Sunday morning. The headline stretched across the digital front page of one of the most respected political journals in the country. It named Stefan Remick, senior partner at Benton Strategies, and Hillary Strauss, his executive assistant, as central figures in a network of concealed lobbying payments. The piece outlined the spreadsheets, the memos, the timelines, all presented with enough detail to leave little room for denial. My name was never mentioned. Claire had promised me that this wasn't about me. It was about him. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, Stefan's phone lit up with calls he couldn't ignore. Clients demanded explanations. Partners issued statements distancing themselves, and political figures scrambled to deny knowledge of his actions. Benton Strategies convened an emergency board meeting, and the firm's carefully cultivated reputation cracked under the weight of the evidence. Hillary was placed on indefinite leave, her career effectively frozen. For someone who had spent years positioning herself as indispensable, she suddenly found herself without an office to walk into. That evening, While the story spread across networks and social media, Stefan finally managed to reach me. I answered his video call not because I wanted to hear his excuses, but because I wanted to see his face while the empire he had built began to crumble. His hair was disheveled, his tie loosened in defeat, and his voice was sharp with a mixture of anger and desperation. He accused me of betrayal, of conspiring with Claire, of trying to ruin him. He insisted that without my help, his career would be finished, that his family name would be dragged through the mud, that everything he had worked for would be destroyed. His words spilled out like a man drowning, searching for someone to pull him back to the surface. I listened quietly, and then I reminded him of his own words. He had once told Hillary that our marriage was nothing more than a strategic partnership, that I was predictable, comfortable, and convenient, that I provided him with the appearance of stability while he pursued what he really wanted. Now I was simply returning the favor. If he wanted to call this a partnership, then he should have understood that leverage works both ways. My calmness unsettled him more than shouting ever could. He demanded that I come home, that I stand beside him at press conferences, that I play the role of the loyal wife one more time. I told him he had already chosen his partner, and her name was Hillary Strauss. Let her stand in front of the cameras and defend him. The call ended with his face frozen in disbelief. For the first time in our marriage, he realized I wasn't coming back. His reputation was fractured, his mistress exposed, and the story had only just begun to spread. I closed the laptop and sat back, the night air drifting across the balcony. This was only the first strike. Stefan had spent years teaching me that image was everything. Tonight, I had shown him what it meant to lose it. The first strike had torn Stefan's image apart, but I knew reputation alone would not finish him. Men like Stefan could rebuild their public face with enough money and the right allies. If I wanted true justice, I needed to cut deeper. His power had always rested on two things: his access to capital and his ability to convince people he controlled the room. Both could be taken from him. While he scrambled to contain the media storm, I moved quietly in Dubai. David Ross, the investment director I had met at the conference, and introduced me to colleagues who specialized in large-scale real estate development. They were seeking American partners who understood international finance and regulatory law. I explained my background, careful but direct. And for the first time in years, I felt my voice carry weight. David suggested I invest directly into one of their sustainable projects, a new residential and commercial development designed around green technology. The minimum capital was significant, but I wasn't worried. Stefan had always prided himself on keeping our accounts flush to impress his partners. Our joint account gave me full legal right to the money, and for once I would use it for something that built rather than destroyed. I transferred the funds into the Dubai project within a week. The transaction was transparent, documented, and entirely within my rights. By the time Stefan realized what I had done, the money was already tied to contracts he couldn't touch. His reaction came in a furious email, accusing me of draining the very resources he needed to salvage the Morrison deal. That contract, the crown jewel he had dangled in front of the firm for months, now teetered on collapse because his liquidity was gone. I imagined him sitting in his Chicago office, surrounded by anxious partners, staring at numbers that no longer added up. The irony was almost poetic. For years, he had lectured me about investments, about strategy, about how I didn't understand the mechanics of power. Now it was my decision, the choice to reallocate what was legally mine, that had knocked his foundation out from under him. Without that account, he couldn't buy time with creditors, couldn't smooth over clients with expensive dinners, couldn't fund the glossy presentations that kept his firm alive. Every check he had written to maintain control now bounced against the reality of empty reserves. And then came the second twist. Sharper than anything I could have orchestrated. Hillary Strauss, once so smug and certain, broke ranks, cornered by suspension and facing the collapse of her own career. She turned on Stefan. She provided investigators with additional files, including internal memos that tied him directly to questionable payments. Her testimony wasn't about loyalty or conscience, it was survival. She wanted to save herself. And the easiest way was to hand him over. For Stefan, it was the ultimate betrayal. The woman he had chosen over me was now the one sealing his downfall. When the federal summons arrived at his office, it was no longer a matter of reputation. It was a matter of law. Benton's strategies began to fracture under the weight of subpoenas, partners resigning before they too were implicated. The man who once strutted through boardrooms as if he owned the future was suddenly fighting to keep his license and his freedom. Watching from half a world away, I felt no pity. He had gambled with our marriage, with his firm, with the very rules that governed his profession, and now, stripped of both allies and capital, he finally understood what it meant to lose control. The night I received confirmation of the summons, I walked the waterfront in Dubai with David. Lights shimmered off the Gulf, the city alive with energy and ambition. I breathed in the warm air and let myself feel the weight lifting. Stefan's empire of money and influence had begun to collapse. And I hadn't needed to shout or plead. I had simply used the tools he had left in my hands. For the first time in 15 years, I held the leverage. And I intended to use it until the very end. The summons was only the beginning. Over the next several months, Stefan's world collapsed piece by piece. Federal investigators moved quickly, armed not only with the documents I had uncovered, but also with the testimony Hilary Strauss provided in exchange for leniency. Benton's strategies, once a formidable player in Washington lobbying circles, lost its clients almost overnight. Contracts were suspended. Political allies distanced themselves. And the firm itself dissolved under the weight of scandal. Stefan was stripped of his partnership. His license threatened. His reputation ruined beyond repair. Hilary fared no better. The woman who had imagined herself as untouchable was barred from working in corporate administration, her name permanently attached to corruption hearings. Together, they became examples of how quickly power rots when built on lies. I followed the news from Dubai, but I didn't gloat. The satisfaction came not from their humiliation, but from the clarity of seeing justice move forward. For years, I had allowed Stefan to define what success meant, to measure my worth by the shine of his career. Now I had written my own definition. The courts would handle him. I had other work to do. In Dubai, the consulting role I had begun with David Ross expanded into something more permanent. I presented proposals at development forums, negotiated contracts, and drafted compliance frameworks for international investors. My knowledge of both law and sustainable development made me valuable in ways I hadn't anticipated. Soon, I was no longer the woman rediscovering her voice. I was the professional leading discussions in rooms filled with architects, financiers, and city officials. The Marina Gardens project became the centerpiece of my portfolio, a model of integrated living that balanced housing, commerce, and green space. I had once thought I'd buried my career forever. Now, it was thriving on a stage I hadn't even imagined before. 6 months after the first article ran, I stood in a glass-walled conference room, presenting to a panel of investors. Behind me, digital renderings showed the vertical community I had helped design. As I explained, the projected impact reduced traffic congestion, lower emissions, community spaces that fostered real human connection. I felt the energy in the room shift. When the presentation ended, the lead investor, a woman named Sydney Hall, extended her hand and said the project was greenlit. Construction would begin within the year. Applause filled the room. But what stayed with me most was the reflection I caught in the glass. My own face. Animated and alive. no longer defined by anyone else's ambition. I had stepped into a life that belonged entirely to me. That evening, I received a call from Claire. Her voice carried pride I hadn't heard since our college days. She told me our mother had read the Architectural Digest feature on the Marina Gardens project and had cried. For so long, my family had watched me fade into the background of Stefan's career, unsure how to reach me. Now they saw me clearly again. Not as a wife supporting someone else's legacy, but as a woman carving out her own. Claire reminded me that my story had become more than personal. It was a signal to anyone who had ever been silenced that it wasn't too late to reclaim what was theirs. Later that week, my phone lit up with a number I recognized but had avoided. I answered, not out of curiosity but closure. Stefan's voice was smaller than I remembered. He said he had seen the article, that I looked successful, that perhaps he had underestimated me. He admitted Hillary had left him, that the partners had abandoned him, that he was starting over in a small consulting role far from the city where he once commanded attention. For the first time in all our years together, he sounded uncertain. He told me I had been remarkable all along, that he had simply been too blinded by his own ambition to see it. I listened without interruption. Then I told him the truth. I no longer needed his recognition, his approval, or his apology. The silence that followed was heavy, final. When I hung up, I felt a chapter close with a clarity I had never experienced before. That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment overlooking Dubai Creek. The sky glowed with the reflection of the city's towers, the water alive with the movement of boats. I held a cup of tea and let the quiet surround me. I thought about the 15 years I had spent as the predictable wife, the invisible partner. I thought about the laughter behind Stefan's office door, the way they had mocked me for being too easy to control. And I thought about the moment I pressed book flight and chose myself. Every step since had led me here. Stefan's downfall was complete. Hillary's ambitions had collapsed. And I was no longer their supporting character. I was the author of my own story. Justice hadn't come from rage or chaos. It had come from patience, from strategy, from using the very tools Stefan once wielded against me. He had taught me that power was about leverage. In the end, I showed him that real power comes from refusing to be diminished. My revenge was never about destroying him. It was about freeing myself. And as I watched the lights shimmer across the gulf, I knew I had done both. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Your time and presence here mean everything. Subscribe to Revenge Ties to continue sharing in these journeys of truth and strength. Together, we'll uncover more stories where betrayal ends and dignity shines through.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.